All right, how did everyone like episode 5 of The Ones Who Live? I loved it, of course. And it's one of those things I have to use a little sarcasm here and say, oh yeah, nothing to see here. Just a billion callbacks to Beth and Daryl. I mean, it was ridiculous, guys. Okay, so let's just dive right in. I've got a lot to say, and I think we're going to figure some stuff out more as we rewatch it and go throughout the week, because I've only watched it once, and already in talking very briefly with my fellow theorists, they're pulling up things that I didn't catch the first time. So we're going to be definitely making a lot of connections here. All right, so the very first thing we see are black shoes and pants walking through the woods. Now, the first thing I thought of here was Morgan. We saw his feet running when he left Alexandria and went to Texas, which was him leaving to go to Fear the Walking Dead, right? But we also saw Beth walking, focused on her boots and inmates, and of course, Rick on the bridge. So we see this pretty often. And now that I'm thinking about it, in every one of those cases, assuming that we're right about Beth, which, we totally are, in every one of those cases, the people who were walking were headed toward the CRM in some way, right? Because Morgan went to Fear, and that's actually, he's probably the most indirect one of those four I just mentioned. But he meets Al and Isabel, and of course, that's how we first started to actually get our first really good glimpse of the CRM and what it was. Obviously, Rick on the bridge was headed toward, where Jadis was going to take him. Beth and inmates, she was on the path to Grady, which we believe led her into the CRM. And then this turned out to be Father Gabriel, and he met Jadis in the woods. I will say that I was surprised to see Gabriel. I kind of did a happy little gasp, and that's only because I didn't really expect to see anybody from Alexandria here. Now, do remember that Gimple promised we would see other familiar faces, and everyone was, of course, we were thinking maybe Beth, but a lot of people were thinking Heath. We still haven't seen Heath. We don't know where he is. And I wonder if this is who he was talking about. He was sort of hinting that we might see Gabriel. But it was, at the same time, not that surprising that of all the characters we would see him, because he's always been so connected to Jadis in the past. And how many times have I said that everything is wide open with them, and they're going to have some sort of closure for the two of them, and that's kind of what this was supposed to be. Anyway, so we see them. We see Father Gabriel saying the Lord's Prayer. Now, this was kind of interesting, and I don't even think I really thought about it the first time through, but okay, so the one thing I did rewatch is I did go back and rewatch just this first couple of seconds, the sequence, because I couldn't remember if he maybe killed this walker by getting it in the head, and so I wanted to rewatch it, and then on rewatching it, it actually sort of gave me chills, this whole sequence. It was really interesting. So we see that it's Gabriel, and remember that Gabriel is the serious character because he's only got the one working eye. Okay, so you could see that as Beth. That would be accurate. She's a series character too. But you could also even maybe just see it as the one-eyed dog. Okay, there's a character that literally has one eye walking here. And then he sees a helicopter overhead and he looks up. Okay, so it's like becoming aware of the CRM, or just a sign that the CRM is around, right? And then this walker comes up on him, kind of surprises him because he was distracted by the helicopter, but he throws it down and kills it. And for the record, we don't really see where he hits it. I mean, probably in the head to kill it, but it doesn't really show it. We more see it looking at Gabriel, than from his point of view. And, we just kind of see blood flying. And then he looks up at the helicopter again, and then he starts saying the Lord's Prayer. Now, to me, this is, I guess it's not exactly a foreshadow, but a callback symbolic sequence to what happened in season 5. Okay, because we have the one-eyed serious character, which represents Beth. And then we have the fact that the CRM was hovering around somewhere and we didn't really know it, right? They were kind of unseen, as it were. The killing the walker could represent Beth getting shot, for sure. It could also represent the walkers that came during the missing 17 days that we haven't seen, which led to her being left behind, right? And then the fact that he says the Lord's Prayer, it just reminds me of the fact that she had a cross bracelet on her arm and she was a sacrifice. And remember that it was Gabriel in 5:16 who talked about sacrificing one of their own. Those were actually his words, his dialogue. So I feel like this is a callback to, symbolically what happened in season 5. But then I noticed something else on the rewatch, which is interesting, and I'm not sure I've entirely hit on what it means yet. But the walker looked just like Gabriel, okay? Not like Beth. He looked like Gabriel. If you look at him, he was bald, for one thing. It's really hard to tell what his nationality was, but he's wearing a dark trench coat, just like Gabriel is, like gray pants and black shoes, okay? It's almost like Gabriel killed himself here. Now, that could be a Gabriel thing, and I don't think by any means that we've seen the end of Gabriel. If you've watched the episode, you know that he's still around, and obviously he was years later at Alexandria. But again, if he as the Sirius symbol represents Beth, this could also represent a part of Beth dying. We've talked about this before, that she'll come back stronger. The weaker part of her, maybe somewhat the gullible part of her, will have died. Something like that. I'm not sure. I haven't entirely hit on exactly why they did that, and maybe it's as much a Gabriel thing as it is a Beth thing. Especially given what happens with Jadis, it could be foreshadowing sort of an emotional or shamanic death for him. If you know what that means, it just means more like a spiritual. Some part of him dying or losing hope because of what happens with Jadis. He's about to lose somebody, but in a way, maybe it's a good thing, because maybe it's a part of him that needed to die so that the rest of him could survive. Especially given that Jadis basically chose the dark side. I mean, let's face it, she still had goodness in her, and Gabriel saw that, and he was trying to get her to embrace that. And Rick did several times too, but as the years went on, she didn't get better. She got worse. So anyway, it's just really super interesting. And guys, that's the first 3 seconds of the episode. We haven't even gotten into anything yet. All right. So, we see Rick and Michonne. They're driving around in their yellow car. They find a bunch of ramen noodles. Tasteful nudes, which I thought was funny. And Michonne thought that was funny too. Now, obviously, this is something of a callback to 7/12, which is where Rick and Michonne are together. They find the school and they find all that food, right, to take back to Alexandria. And I will say that Gimple did sort of confirm this in the, cast diaries after the episode bit. But here's the thing. Number one, let's talk about it being a callback to 7/12, because it clearly is, but that's actually super important for us, because what it shows is that they have fulfilled that symbolism, right? So that was the episode where they really heavily foreshadowed Rick leaving and Michonne thinking he was dead, and then him showing up and them being reunited, right? And it happened all very quickly when he fell into the horde of walkers, and then he came out of that yellow ride car, right? Because they were near the Ferris wheel and a bunch of other rides, right? And actually, I didn't even think of that last week, the yellow truck. I mean, yellow is obviously a big Beth symbol because of her yellow polo, and we believe it means escape, especially escape from death. So it all works really, really well that when they finally escaped the CRM, Rick and Michonne, they were in a yellow truck. But it didn't occur to me to specifically link it to 7/12 and Rick coming out of the yellow ride car. So what this means is that they bookended Rick inside the CRM, first with 7/12, which was a foreshadow, and he didn't actually go into the CRM for another season after that, but even so. And now they're doing this other episode afterward to call back to that and show that they have fulfilled that symbolism. So the reason that's important is just because it just, guys, once again, it shows that Gimple knows what he's doing. He planned this a long time ago, and he's bookending them to show us that he did fulfill all that symbolism for them, and he will for Beth as well. And then, of course, we've got the yellow. We've got a deer in that episode. We've got all kinds of stuff that also pertains to Beth. So the other thing that I will say, though, is that Gimple, in the Insider episode at the very end, he did say this calls back to another episode we did from The Walking Dead. And when he's saying that, it doesn't show scenes from any other episode. It only shows scenes from this episode. So the scene they showed is when Rick and Michonne found the food, the ramen. And so he's definitely implying that it's a callback to 7/12, but he doesn't actually say that, okay? He just says it's a callback to another episode we did for, The Walking Dead flagship show. And I think he is very specifically vague about that because he's not just talking about that episode. He's talking about all the episodes this calls back to. I mean, we got callbacks from Still Alone, Inmates, Find Me, all kinds of things, okay? So I thought that was kind of interesting that he didn't get super specific about what it was a callback to. The other thing that this reminded me of course, is Beth and Daryl finding food inside the funeral home because they just happened on it. And especially that Rick and Michonne were so happy they found it. It just reminded me of, Beth going, whoa, and they're, so happy that they found their stash. So there was that. Then we see them eating it. And this scene was very much like 7/12 when they're eating together kind of over a fire. I did notice a big horse decal in the back. So we saw horses. There was an ask last week about horses, and I do think that they are a Beth symbol. This decal showed that they were in Wyoming. So they were on the West Coast before, and they're heading cross-country back toward Alexandria, and they had made it as far as Wyoming. We see Rick drinking a soda and looking at a picture of Carl. The soda reminded me of Denise, and actually, she didn't actually drink the soda, but remember that Rick and Daryl went looking for orange soda for her. And get this. I'm going to throw this out there. I'm totally going to do it. There were a couple of things here that reminded me of when they found Jesus in season 6. One of them was the soda. They were out looking for orange soda. I mean, among other things, they were looking for a bunch of supplies. But remember that Tara requested Daryl get that. Or no. It was the other way around. Sorry. Denise requested he get that for Tara because she liked it. And they ended up having to drink it because they were running on foot chasing Jesus around. But my point is, there was soda, they were drinking soda, and then they met Jesus, and Beth is the Christ figure. So Rick drinking soda here could mean we're about to stumble upon the Christ figure again. I hope so, and we're going to come back to that. So that's what that reminded me of. We had Three Pines Trail, of course, the three, right? I thought the song was funny. It was talking about kiss the good life goodbye, and that's probably because the crap's about to hit the fan, right? Which that always happens in The Walking Dead. They find a shop that's sort of like I first wanted to say it was maybe like a tackle shop or a hunting shop, but really in Wyoming it's probably just a touristy shop, anywhere along the way. And I noticed that pretty much everywhere they went in this episode, again, because it was Wyoming, there was a lot of antlers on the walls and a lot of stuffed bears, like stuffed grizzly bears and that sort of thing. So the deer symbol and the bear symbol are both very, very potent Beth symbols, and we just saw a lot of them in the background in this episode. The deer, because I've got metas on this I can link, but the deer being alive or dead, the opposite happens with a human. So remember back in season 4, Mika would not kill the deer, and she died, of course, because Lizzie killed her, and then we see the deer alive. But right after Beth died, in Them, when Daryl keeps leaving the group, one of the times that he's out in the woods by himself, he sees the carcass of a dead deer. And the fact that the deer is dead means that Beth is alive somewhere. So it's just, the deer is the opposite of what happens to the person, to the character. It's kind of this really interesting inverse symbol that they do. And then, of course, the bear is part of the astrological stuff, the North Star. Anyway, lots and lots of metas on those that we can talk about, that I've done and that other people have done. So it's just, they're big symbols. We did see license plates with names on them. Remember back in season 5, Aaron was collecting license plates, and we haven't heard a whole lot about that since. We also had the license plate in season 5, in 516 that said Alaska on it, which was right before they ran into the wolves. They found that one. Wolves, obviously a big symbol of Beth, and there was, in this first tackle shop, when Rick was looking at the license plates, there was a stuffed wolf, like a stuffed animal, on the shelf. So the fact that we had license plate and wolves together, again, that symbol is really, really purposeful and really important. They decided to stay at Three Pines Cabin, and this is where we also see this kind of hulking figure. There was a lot of speculation about who it was. Plenty of people thought it was Jadis, and they ended up being correct about that. I did point out last week that it reminded me of the picture in 509, and that there was somebody looking in the window. And I really do believe that this could be something of a fulfillment of that symbol, because we have a cabin in that picture. Okay, so let's set the whole scene here. 509, this is Tyrese's death, right? And Beth is in that episode, okay? Yes, as his hallucination, but still she's there. We have tons of foreshadowing of the CRM. Like literally there are helicopters and black uniforms like what Jadis wears, and just all kinds of stuff. Now that you know what it is, go back and watch that episode. At the time, we didn't know anything about the CRM, so it was just kind of like, okay, this is weird, But now that we know, it's like, oh, okay, that makes way more sense now. Anyway, so she's in that episode, and there's this picture it keeps showing, and at the top it looks like what could be just fall leaves, like orange, red, and yellow foliage, right? But it also could be flames, and you really can't tell which it is. There is a dog and an American flag on the porch, which probably foreshadows, kind of like the symbolism of war, Revolutionary War, Civil War, things like that. And then, of course, the dog is the serious symbol. And there's a walker on the side of the house that it kind of looks like a walker, but at the same time, it looks like it's looking in the window. And why would a walker just look in the window? Like, it's really kind of a creepy figure. And we never really knew what that cabin represented. Now, we've had lots of theories over the year. A lot of people think that maybe it represents something about Beth and what happened to her after or during the missing 17 days, maybe somewhere she went or somewhere she ended up. But I do also think that this could be one fulfillment of that symbolism, in that Rick and Michonne went here, and to them it was a safe place, and it was them living the life they wanted to live, which was just being together, being married, heading back to their family. Like, they were very happy heading to this cabin. There was a lot of romance going on, right? And then the hulking figure was Jadis, who just basically came and spoiled all of that. And as this episode ends, it seems like things are going pretty well, and that they've got all these grand plans to go stop the CRM. But I think we can all pretty much count on the fact that things are not going to go according to plan, right? Okay, so anyway, the cabin's just super interesting, and the fact that we had this hulking figure, it was Jadis, which means even if, all I'm trying to say is that this cabin probably has more than one fulfillment. I think it will have some sort of fulfillment in something that happens with Beth and Daryl. And so I don't think we've seen the entirety of it yet, but this was one iteration of it. And in this case, Jadis does represent the CRM coming in and ruining things. And so given that, you could almost say that in a very general way, the cabin represents a happy, fulfilled, somewhat civil life, right? And then the hulking figure looking in the window is the thing that's about to come and ruin that. And that's always the CRM. It probably has been from the beginning. So, Beth and Daryl in the funeral home, that cabin on, in Tyrese's death hallucination, it really might have been a representation of the funeral home, assuming that we're at all right about the CRM purposely smoking Beth and Daryl out of there and, setting up the walkers on the porch and everything. Because Beth and Daryl, much like Rick and Michonne, were kind of living a happy domestic, they were planning to stay, right, kind of life. And then the CRM had to come in and ruin that and take that, and then crap hit the fan, and, that led straight to Coda, which, we all hate that and it sucks. But you see what I mean. I feel like this is it's a really interesting symbol that we see it, and it was, in 509, it was probably a callback and a look forward as well. So I just thought it was really interesting to actually see something of fulfillment of that symbolism, and the fact that there's a dog on the porch means that there's a serious character involved. And there really wasn't in this case in the cabin, but we did have the parallel Father Gabriel story going on, which again, I think that he is representative of Beth in a lot of ways in this episode. So super fascinating. I feel like we could go down 10,000 rabbit holes and never come out with this episode. It's just really, really interesting. Which also leads me to, you know what? I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, before they actually get to the cabin, they run into these three people, right? Two men and a woman, and they first help them and give them noodles, and then the people pull guns on them and try to take their food, and that pisses everybody off. Okay, so one thing was, I totally didn't register it while I was watching the scene until Michonne said something later on, but the girl had stepped in a small game trap. So you see them messing with her leg and trying to pull something off her, but I don't know. I mean, there's a lot going on in the scene. Sometimes you don't register things the first time through, and I thought it was more like they were fighting with a walker that had grabbed her or something, but no, she stepped in a small game trap, guys. Beth. Alone, like they're very much calling back to this. Also, the fact that the guy's name is Red, he was wearing a red checkered jacket, and he had a red gun. Now, and I forgot to mention that with Father Gabriel. Okay, so the red gun could be a callback to the red machete. Again, I still 100% think that the red machete is Beth, and I think that maybe this is a sign that we're finally going to figure out who that is, because we have someone with a red weapon, which honestly, well, okay, again. I can do this on so many levels. Let me come back to that. What I was going to say is that Father Gabriel, at the beginning, when he killed that walker, had a machete. And it was not red. It was black. But even so, they really focused on that machete. And I went, we got the feet walking through the woods, and we got the red machete. It was just like another reason that I felt like that sequence was indicative of Beth. So obviously with these people in the woods who she gets caught in a trap and everything, and then Rick and Michonne help them and give them food. And then they take the food back because the people tried to hurt them. And then, of course, we run into them later with Jadis. But here's the thing. In this particular sequence with these three people, I'm thinking that the red actually represents Rick. Why? Because especially if we call back to season 4 and 5, we have the girl stepping in the trap, which was clearly a callback to Beth. Like, literally no one else has ever stepped in a small game trap. We did have the doctor in... I'm going to forget which episode. It's in season 7 where they found the ham radio and he stepped in a big bear trap, and we did connect that back to Beth. But even so, no one's ever stepped in a small one exactly like Beth, and this girl did. So obviously she's Beth. But then we have Red, who you kind of get the sense that he could theoretically be a good guy, but he's so intent on surviving and helping his people survive that he does something that is less than moral and kind of spits in the face of people who are trying to help him. And that just feels like Rick in Coda, that he was so brutal at that point, that he was doing things that weren't the most moral, and that led to disaster, basically. So I almost think that these 3 people were a replay of Team Family in Coda. And we will get back to that in a minute when we actually get to their demise. But anyway, so there was a lot of parallels there. The third guy, I'm not sure exactly who he would represent, possibly Daryl, even though this guy was kind of a weasel, and obviously Daryl is not. He kind of made me think of Mitch back in season 4. So when the governor attacked the prison, we had foils for a bunch of the characters, right? Obviously, the governor was a foil for Rick, and Mitch was the governor's right-hand man, and he was not a good man at all. He was really a jerk. He was kind of a tool. I mean, he was with the governor, and he was very brutal, but it was important, number one, that he had no sleeves, because at that point, Daryl didn't either, so they were setting him up even in the way he dressed as a foil for Daryl, and then Daryl's the one that kills him. Daryl literally puts a bolt in his heart, which is like killing the shadow side of himself. Anyway, so this guy, it might be like that, like a shadow side of Daryl, because this guy is clearly a follower and he does whatever the leader wants him to do. So he would be like the really terrible, non-admirable version of Daryl or something like that. I don't know. I need to watch it again and maybe I'll think he represents someone else. But for now, that's kind of what I got. So Rick and Michonne see these people. They take the money back and then they leave them and just tell them, keep your promise. We're not going to kill you, but, be cool to people, basically. Then they go to the cabin. Rick finds alcohol. So that's a big one too, right? Cabin, much like the Moonshine Shack, we find alcohol here. He gives Michonne the necklace that he kind of made for her by breaking off the rest of the name, which was really sweet. And then we get to the part the next morning. So you'll notice I'm skipping over the Gabriel and Jadis bit. I'll go over that in just a minute. I'd rather keep the Rick and Michonne part kind of continuous. When they wake up, Jadis is standing in the cabin with a gun to them. Now, this really, really heavily parallels what happened when they found Jesus. Because remember that they had put him somewhere in a prison of sorts and he woke up and snuck out. And that was right after Rick and Michonne first got together and first hooked up. And they woke up and he was in the room going, Rick. If anything, a little creepy. But anyway, I believe this was a callback to that. So where Jesus was obviously a good guy and, the name implies certain religious things. And Jadis is standing here in black, right? And so it's kind of the opposite. But again, this is the other thing that I want to point to, actually 2 out of 3, that happened when they found Jesus back in season 6, okay? And I believe they're doing that on purpose because we're about to run into Beth, and she will be the Christ figure. Obviously, her name is not Jesus, but it's the same kind of thing. So they have this kind of conversation with Jadis, and the biggest thing about Jadis is that she's truly not evil through and through, but she more represents, like I said, someone who kind of just went over to the dark side. At every single touch point, she was given the chance to choose something different, and she didn't. And that led directly to what happens to her in this episode. A couple of small symbols here. I noticed that she talked about seeing the wreck and kind of knowing that something suspicious was going on. And she said, you remember strange things in a moment like that. A spider, the smell of ozone. These are just kind of interesting symbols. I'm not even going to go too much into what I think they mean, but the ozone could be gas. We've seen the green gas, which represents a type of destruction, and also like experiments that the CRM might be doing. The spider we've seen a couple of times, usually around villains. We definitely saw it around Alpha. And I want to say that we saw it another time too, but I don't remember. So it's just kind of interesting symbols that they're throwing in at this point. But of course, Rick and Michonne fight back. Michonne manages to hit Jadis with a hatchet in the gut, which is like, ooh. And she runs away. They chase her in the yellow car, but she's hurt pretty bad. They run her off the road. When they get down to the wreckage, the door is open and she's gone, which is clearly a callback to Beth being gone when they come and find her. And then Jadis staggers off into the woods, as we think Beth may have done, injured. And Jadis, in this case, finds those three people I just talked about that Rick and Michonne tried to give the noodles to. Rick and Michonne go to a new place. It actually is a different place. There's all these sheets set up as though it might have once been used as a hospital, which very well could be. I thought of two things. The first thing I thought of was the Green Army tents in 401 at the big spot. You know, they were set up kind of like that. You just have canvases all over that people are looking between, and it was obviously once used as like a... I can't think of the word, almost like a triage center or something. But then I thought, if this was supposed to be a hospital of some kind, then this is a callback to Grady as well. And I 100% think that's true. I'll tell you why in just a second. So they get in this place. It is a lot like the first touristy shop that Rick and Michonne went to, in that there are stuffed bears, there's a stuffed deer. So again, these symbols are a big deal, and they're all over the place. Okay, sorry, I had to stop for a minute. I was writing so fast I couldn't even read my own notes. There are also a lot of water symbols in this episode, which I'll get to a little bit more at the end with Gabriel. But we did see rivers, we did see riverbeds, and we saw, they talked about the walkers with the hard outer shell for skin being because of the steam vents. So that was calcifying them, which is interesting. But then when they went into this place, there was a sign outside that said how a geyser works. And of course, a geyser is a water thing too. So anyway, just wanted to mention the water symbols because they are everywhere. So then what happens inside? Now, obviously, these three people have decided to help Jadis because she promised basically to take them back to the CRM with her. And very quickly, we basically see them go down. We see their demise. But what I noticed was that it is the woman, the same one who stepped in the small game trap, that goes down first because walkers bite her. And then the other two guys run to try and protect her, and eventually they all get taken down, right? So again, this feels like a replay of Grady. We have the girl who stepped in the small game trap. She ends up in this place that maybe was used one time as a hospital or convalescence of some kind, and then she, quote unquote, dies, gets bitten. I mean, it's all there. Of course, in this case, she really does die, as do the two guys that are with her, which, Rick and Daryl, not so much, assuming it's meant to be them. But the point is, these are like shadow figures of Rick and Daryl and Beth. And, I've said so many times now that scene in the hallway of Grady, when Beth is really nose to nose with Dawn just before she gets shot, you can see Rick and Daryl on either side of her. It's like the three of them are being shown purposely in that shot as survivors, as leaders, right? And they're not by far the only leaders. I mean, Michonne wasn't there, right? And Maggie wasn't there, and all of that. But I think it was very purposeful in showing those three. So you could argue that if these three people represented Rick and Daryl and Beth, and they died because they're the shadow figures, then that would, follow that to conclusion, that would just mean that Rick and Daryl and Beth, their actual iterations, all survived. Do you see what I mean? Like, it has to go one way or the other, the pattern. So anyway, super, super interesting. I was just eating this up. When Jadis is shooting at Rick and Michonne, he gets hit in the forehead. Now, I did mention this last week that in the trailer I could see that he had a cut on his forehead, exactly where Beth got shot. And in this case, I believe it was shrapnel. She didn't actually graze him with a bullet. I don't think. It was hard to tell. But it doesn't really matter whether it was the actual bullet or not, because it was caused by a bullet. So even if it wasn't the bullet that grazed his forehead, and I'm pretty sure it was wooden shrapnel that did it, she was still shooting at him. And she hit the wood, and that caused shrapnel, which then hit him in the forehead, and, he had that cut there afterward. But the point is, there were bullets flying, and Rick ends up with this forehead wound. Like, that's not an accident, guys, right? Especially in a place that seems to be a callback to Grady. They make a deal in which Michonne is going to leave and Rick is going to go back with Jadis, which clearly they were lying about. And Jadis kind of knew that, but during this whole thing, Jadis is bitten. So Jadis is done, needless to say. But at this point, Michonne says that they are going to go back and stop the CRM because they are not the answer and they are killing people, and that needs to stop. So then Jadis has this interesting little monologue that I thought was really great for summing up her character, and especially for summing up a character who has, basically chosen the dark side. I actually kind of love it when people do this. It's not, I will say it's not terribly realistic, but, this is fiction, so it's okay. Most people who have gone down the dark path, even as they're dying, not very often will they really admit that what they did was wrong necessarily. I don't know. Not that I've met a whole lot of people and watched them die who were super evil, but it just seems to me that I know a lot about psychology and where their head is at. They usually wouldn't do that. Of course, I'm sure there's some exceptions. But in fiction, a lot of times in order to understand the villain's thoughts, we can have this moment where they have this complete self-awareness and they can sort of step outside of their own terrible decisions and define who they were and why they did what they did. And this is what Jadis does. And she says, "I wish I died an artist." Because that, meaning art, is not about survival. It's just about truth. And I'm paraphrasing there. Now, so many things about this. Number one, clearly it's a callback to Beth and Edward's discussion about art at Grady, in which he says art is not about survival, it's about transcendence. But Beth says, we can still do that. I still sing, right? And I think the important, again, after talking to W.D. Way, which I'm going to give you her thoughts in just a minute, we didn't realize to what extent Jadis is being set up as an antithesis to Beth here, okay? I mean, of course she is in general because she's kind of villainy and Beth is not, but she feels much more like an antithesis to Rick, and in terms of the plot, that's definitely true. But symbolically, I mean, even though she painted and Beth sang, it's still about art and it's still about transcendence despite having to put survival first. And they can still, art is a symbol of holding on to your humanity and not just being bare bones survival, because bare bones survival tends to make people really brutal and savage just so they can survive. Okay, so we had this really interesting juxtaposition here of Rick and Michonne, who have reclaimed their humanity, and especially because they found each other and are back in their relationship and they're heading home to their kids and all of that. And then, of course, these three shadow figures who were just about survival and they died because of it. I mean, this is very, very purposeful, showing us the contrast here, right? And so with Jadis, she's the opposite of Beth. Beth always embraced her art. She always embraced singing. She still sang despite everything. Jadis stopped painting. And that was the first step on her heading down a dark path that just got darker and darker, and she got further and further away from what was really important. And then here, as she's dying, she says, "I wish I died an artist," which just means she wished she had chosen something different. And because she didn't, that led directly to her death in this moment. She does give Rick the ring that Gabriel gave her, which I'll talk about Gabriel in a minute. And then, of course, Rick shoots her. There's no coming back for Jadis. She was bitten on the neck, so obviously they can't cut that off. And we did see what happened to her body. We saw two things. We saw Rick shoot her in the head, which, okay, granted, people saw Beth get shot in the head. But in this case, it didn't feel at all like something she would have survived. And even if she had, she would be a walker because she was bitten. We did also see her be buried. And my first thought about that was, okay, yet another person, we saw their burial, or at least their grave, and we did not see Beth's, interesting. So, of course, before they head back into the CRM, Rick gives Michonne the ring and proposes, which was very sweet. I absolutely loved that scene, and I was really glad they did that. All right, so let's talk about Gabriel and Anne real fast. It started 3 years ago, and this is where Gabriel first blesses the water, so it's a water symbol, and he's blessing it to create holy water. And then he sees Jadis, and he hugs her, and he says that he was out looking for her using Eugene's ham radio, and then she found him. Okay, so a couple of things here, a few things. Number one, when he's meeting with Jadis in the woods, especially that first time, it looks very ethereal. Like it's almost like it's misty or kind of white, like they're using a different filter on the film. And generally when that's the case, it's either a dream or a hallucination, or there's just something a little bit odd going on. Now, I was thinking at first that this could be a dream, that this might not be real. Then when we get to the end and Jadis gives Rick the ring, I went, okay, well, maybe that's to prove that it was real and she really did meet with Gabriel. But then I started thinking about it, and I still think there's a good chance that this was a dream. If it was a dream, it's Jadis's dream, not Gabriel's. She's dreaming of Gabriel because she had a relationship with him. And again, I'm not positive that's true. I don't think we really know yet. They haven't given us enough yet to know. But it could be that Jadis just found that ring herself, that Gabriel is sort of one side of her in her mind. And it's because she's lonely. And so she would go in her mind and have these conversations with him. And he represents the good part of her that's still there, that is trying to get her to come back with him, that's trying to get her to re-embrace her humanity and move away from the CRM. But like I said, at every fork in the road, she always chooses wrong. So maybe we'll end up seeing that Gabriel really did meet with her. I think I'm like 50-50 on it. If he did meet with her, great. I can see it being real. I can also see it being a dream and that this was all in Jadis's head. I'm not sure which, but what it reminded me of very, very much was Find Me, in which Daryl was out alone in the woods, right? And every so often, Carol would show up and try to get him to come back to Alexandria with her. Remember, she was worried about him being out there by himself. And this is exactly why for a long time we wondered if Leah was not real, if she was a vision or a hallucination. And, she did end up being real, which is why this could end up being real, that her and Gabriel, Jadis and Gabriel, that is, were out there together. But we still wonder, because of all the etherealness, if maybe a lot of what happened in Find Me, if Daryl is remembering it wrong, if those memories are a little tainted somehow. But we do know now that Leah was very much misleading him. The writers have said that as soon as he saw her and that she was with the Reapers, he knew immediately that she had misrepresented herself. She had represented herself as someone who was kind and sweet and empathetic, and she would not have been with this group of killers if she was the person she pretended to be when she was with Daryl. So he knew right away that he was very, very misled by her. So I think at the very least, this ethereal nature, when it looks like that, it shows that there's some deception, some sort of shenanigans going on, and it might be very psychological, okay? So whatever this was with Gabriel, it does have that quality to it. So a couple of other things about this first scene. She did make a Gone reference. She said she was talking about, what about the people who cannot forgive you because you've killed them, right? They cannot give you forgiveness because you already killed them, and that's not possible now. But she says, what about the ones you made gone? And again, on the surface, she's talking about people she's killed, but she's definitely talking about Rick, too. She made him gone from Alexandria. And Gabriel tells her that he's dead, and you can tell that surprises her, but she doesn't tell Gabriel about what happened or that she knows where Rick is, right? So it's just, yeah, again, we could go down endless rabbit holes forever. The other line that jumped out at me was just when he was talking about using the radio. He said, and I wrote it down exactly, he said, I was using Eugene's ham radio with Rosita's help to somehow find you, and then you found me. That really jumped out at me as maybe something that could happen when Beth reappears. Because of the radio symbol, the ham is a pig symbol, that's big. And then, you were looking for someone and then they find you. It just feels like it could be a foreshadow of maybe something that will happen with Beth's return. So I kind of liked that line, and that jumped out at me. The next one we have of Jadis and Gabriel is 2 years ago. So it's the following year. They always met 1 year apart, right? And this is where Gabriel says that Rick wanted him to marry Rick and Michonne, and Gabriel, he was in kind of a dark place at the time and didn't really want to do it because he didn't have the same vision of the future Rick had. But then he found a ring in the dirt, and, he kind of saw it as a sign, I guess you could say. And again, we could go so psychological in this, because if this is really more in Jadis's head, then it does go to show that she knows that if she had stayed, she probably could have married Gabriel and had a relationship with him. And I totally think it's a thing that she keeps saying that, the reason she's worried about Rick and Michonne is because together they can do anything, and she's afraid that they're going to bring down the CRM. But I think that there's another level that even she is not acknowledging to herself, and that is that she is jealous of their relationship. And yeah, she's always had a thing for Rick, but it's not even that so much as they do have each other and they have found true love and they're willing to embrace that, and she wasn't. She gave that up. So it's kind of a misery loves company thing. She would rather everyone else be miserable like her and Rick not have his true love with him, and so she's going to break them up. I mean, that is a very villainy, misery loves company, I'm in a dark place, so I'm going to make everyone else miserable kind of thing to do. And I think in a lot of ways, talking to Gabriel about a ring is her acknowledging that Gabriel really did care for her and might have married her if she'd have stayed. And then she starts carrying this ring around that apparently he gave her. So it's just interesting. And then at this point, she says her brutal side kept her alive and might have kept the world alive, which is the justification she makes to Rick and Michonne too, and really it's pretty much an excuse. He does ask her for food, and then she says, I'm not even here. So I totally wasn't even catching it the first few times she said that, but we have seen that theme before. In 606, I want to say? No. 604. The one with Eastman. It was called Here's Not Here. And it's about people, again, we could go all kinds of ways with this theme, but people who are there but who are really not there. So that actually might be a hint that this is a dream. You know, she's not really there with him. She kind of knows that it's all in her head. But it could also be a hint of people who are around and you just can't see them, you know, meaning Beth. And even the CRM has been around from the beginning, but Team Family didn't always see them and know that they were there. We've kind of compared that to the Avalon theme too, you know, the whole civilization that's there in the shadows and you just can't see it. Anything else from this time? He gives her the ring and he says it's a symbol of faith and love, both things that are Beth symbols. And then this is interesting too. Next year, same day, same place. And then he says, if I'm alive. Now, obviously, it was him that was alive and it was her. Actually, they do meet one more time. So the next time they are both alive. But that's a foreshadow of Jadis's death. And, you know, going back to the beginning, I said I wasn't sure why they made the Walker look just like Gabriel. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's a matter of he represents the good side of Jadis, who, you know, was trying to get her to do the right thing, to go back to Alexandria, to re-embrace her humanity. And then by killing a Walker that was him, it just shows that she killed her own humanity. She was not willing to let that part of her survive. She killed it so that she could survive. She embraced the hard, evil, angry, doesn't mind killing innocent people side of herself. And that does lead to her physical demise here. Okay, so then a year later, they meet one more time. She's really surprised that he showed up. And then he says, no, you are here. Like, you can say that you're not here, but really you are. And she kisses him. And then after that, she actually tries to kill him. She says he's a loose end. And, you know, I'm sorry I turned you into a loose end. And of course, she doesn't end up killing him. But at the same time, it's kind of the last little bit of humanity that she's turning her back on. And then after this, she doesn't make it back to him again. So yeah, that's most of the Gabriel stuff. And, you know, I have to admit that they do show at the end him waiting for her and she's not there. So again, maybe that shows that it is real and they really did meet. But it could also symbolically be her humanity waiting for her to return and she never does. You know, so it could be symbolic too. And it's, Gimple's having fun with this one. So one more thing that I wanted to say that I totally did not pick up all the symbolism on, but W.D. Wade did. So I'm just going to give you her thoughts. So remember that we saw that they did bury Anne, and they put a little, like with rocks, and they put a little A on her grave. So, of course, my first thought was we didn't see Beth get buried, and A is for Anne, but A is also for an A in the CRM, right, rather than a B. And then W.D. Way picked up a whole bunch more symbolism that didn't occur to me. So, for one thing, they buried her in a riverbed, and it's not a full riverbed, it's like a dry riverbed, but that doesn't mean that it won't fill up with water at some point. So they buried her basically in silt in a riverbed. And they have an A there. So if you can kind of envision the future, at some point there's going to be water and somebody under the water, an A, it kind of becomes resurrection symbol, right? Maybe the person is dead while there's no water, but once the water comes, they could easily float to the surface. If, you know, perchance Rick did not hit her brainstem, maybe she will resurrect as a walker at that point. I mean, I'm not saying I think that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying theoretically it could happen. And the thing is, we have absolutely, seen water as a resurrection symbol before. I mean, first of all, there's the baptism symbol, right? In the Christian world, baptism is meant to be a symbol of resurrection, right? We go down, we're cleansed in the water, we come back up pure, and the going down and coming up is a symbolic resurrection of our souls, right? So water definitely is a resurrection symbol in biblical symbolism and Christian symbolism. But what I was thinking of for The Walking Dead is that way back in season 4, when everybody got sick at the prison, what ended up, for the most part, saving them was water, because what would happen is that they would get so dehydrated from the fever that they would pass out. And of course, they were waiting for antibiotics that Daryl and Michonne were getting, but Herschel went out and got berries to make tea out in the woods. But specifically, there was a part where Sasha passed out. And then the next thing we see is her laying on the ground, and he revived her and he says, "Welcome back." And it was because he gave her an IV that was just water. Like, they were so dehydrated that the water was what was reviving them and bringing them back. And it was because the fever was dehydrating them, right? So water is most definitely a resurrection symbol, and it's a symbol of saving someone, keeping them alive long enough that they can survive. So it's interesting that why would they bury Jadis in a riverbed, right? But again, remember I told you, she's being set up as an antithesis of Beth, very, very much. So, I will just read you what W.D. Way said. She says, "The majority of viewers would not even notice it, let alone really understand the symbolic meaning unless they have a religious background upbringing. I will show the two shots as they were shown. Because of the symbolic symbolism, I want to say it is a riverbed. A riverbed, and the camera simply pulls back slightly." And then she sent some screenshots. And then a picture of the A. And she says, "Now, isn't it so clear? I'll start with the most obvious thing, which is the white A on this very dark, you could say black stone. Very much a Beth equals white, Daryl equals black. I do want to say that for a long time, I've thought that Rick equals black also. And since we know what the A stands for, then I believe it is to indicate that Beth is a part of the CRM. She is an A, even if the organization might not realize it, she might be passing as a B. Now, for the religious part of it, probably the most famous river in the Bible is the River Jordan. The River Jordan was where Jesus was baptized. He was submerged, he was laid into the water, and then he arose. This type of baptism is used in many Christian denominations. Going under the water is to die and be buried with Christ. You are raised up, resurrected in him. For many Christians, it is the single most important symbol of resurrection. Very true. The stone has the very important imagery around it because Christ was laid in a tomb and a stone was blocking the door. On the third day, the stone was pushed away from the tomb and was open and empty. Christ was gone. I just want to point this out, that this episode of The Ones Who Live is shown on Palm Sunday, the week before Easter, where we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. So we see Jadis being buried on Palm Sunday, and next week is the finale, and it happens to be Easter. So we're really crossing our fingers, guys, here. But to take it a little bit further, some of the thoughts I had, because I did not put all of that together even a little bit. I was just scratching the surface in my mind of what this represented. So great job, WDWA. But the other thing I was thinking, I said the thing earlier about the art and the fact that Jadis did not embrace the art. And the art isn't even really what's important. That's the symbol of what's important. It's the humanity, right? Beth still sings. She still has her humanity. Jadis turned her back on her humanity. I mean, Jadis is like Anakin Skywalker here, okay? She made the decision to turn her back on her humanity and take the dark path. That's just what she did. And it's been interesting to see that that journey for her. I kind of wondered if they would have any kind of redemption arc for her, but they decided not to. They didn't, and she died. And this is what I think is kind of the ultimate thing, is that she's being set up as the opposite of Beth. So because she did not embrace her art and her humanity, because she stayed in the CRM and was very loyal to them, she died. And I think now that we've seen her die, that just goes to show, between that and, the soda that Rick was drinking, and the fact that Jadis woke them up in the same way Jesus did. Oh, and I didn't even mention the third thing, which was toothpaste. Rick found toothpaste for Michonne. Remember, he was looking for it in that episode where they found Jesus, and he mentions it. I don't know that they actually found it. Maybe he found her some in the store. I can't remember. But they were calling back to it and talking about it. So many callbacks to that where they found Jesus, right? So I feel like this is just showing that the next thing we're going to see is where they find the Christ figure. And the fact that Jadis did all of these things led to her death. Beth is going to be the opposite of that in most ways. Not only that she did embrace her art and keep singing, but it's more than that too. She's not going to be loyal to the CRM. I think in a lot of ways she could be the opposite of Jadis in the sense that maybe she is in the CRM, but she's a counter agent. You know, she's not loyal to them even if she's pretending to be. Whereas Jadis definitely did drink the Kool-Aid. She was very loyal to them. And it's just going to be all kinds of, and like I said, we just didn't realize the extent to which Jadis was being set up as a foil to Beth, because it feels more like she's a foil to Rick. And in many ways she is. In many ways she's a foil to Michonne. But in this way, you know, I think W.D. Way is right. It's showing her being buried in a riverbed, and that suggests that next Sunday we'll see some sort of resurrection. So like I said, we are really crossing our fingers for this, but this was an excellent episode, and you can see that I've run longer than usual, but there was a lot to talk about, and I think that we're going to find more as we go on. Let me just double check. The only other thing I wrote down from the cast diaries part that Gimple said at the end was, in telling them about the dossier, Jadis chose Anne, which is what Gabe was saying all along. So I guess what they're saying is that was her redemption. She was already dying. You know, there was no way to redeem her and save her life. But by telling them where the dossier was and saying, go get it, destroy it, go home, that was her mini redemption arc. And in that moment, as she was dying, she did choose her humanity over stubborn loyalty to the CRM. And the fact that he says, which is what Gabriel was saying all along, he just wanted her to choose her humanity over her brutality, which in the very, very end she did, but it was too late. So it's still kind of a cautionary tale. But in a way, maybe, again, I still feel like that's kind of giving us some evidence that maybe the Gabriel thing was a dream. Anyway, the fact that we have him as a serious character in this it's just huge. It's just massive. There's no way that this is not pointing all kinds of ways at Beth. And yeah, I really love this episode. I want to watch it 10 more times. And I'm not going to have time to do that, but hopefully at least once more. So let me know what you guys thought about this, and I will get some more of your asks answered this week. And yeah, then we will see what Easter Sunday brings us next week. You know, I did want to point one more thing out. I don't know how many people will remember this, but years ago, I think it was before Abraham died. I think it would have had to be. It was Easter of that year. So it was probably between seasons 5 and 6. I'm trying to remember the dates and when it would have happened. Anyway, people were talking about Easter and resurrection, and, you know, all of us were talking about, could this be the time that Beth comes back? And clearly it was not. But I remember Michael Cudlitz putting something on social media. I think it was on Twitter, and he said, well, one way or the other, someone's coming back from the dead this Sunday, and it was Easter Sunday. And so we all in the fandom flipped out about that. You know, we're like, what is he saying? And then it really wasn't anything. I don't even think they had even a small character resurrection or anything like that. And that's even if... I want to say that we were almost at the end of that season, because Easter, you know, the season, it used to come back in February and would be February and March. So depending on when Easter falls, they might have still been going, or maybe it was the finale. And, you know, obviously we didn't see her in the finale or anything. But why would Michael Cudlitz say that? It might have just been a play on the theme, because it's The Walking Dead, which is all about the dead being resurrected, as Herschel pointed out back in season 2. But I also wonder if Cudlitz just knew that at some point, whenever it actually all went down, it was going to be on Easter. I guess I shouldn't say went down. When it rose up, it was going to be on Easter, and he was just teasing, because he knew eventually it would, but he knew very well it wouldn't be that year. Anyway, I was thinking about that the other day, and I mean, we don't want to get our hopes up too much. If she doesn't show up on Easter, it's not going to kill my belief system or anything like that. I mean, we still have Daryl Dixon season 2 coming at us pretty quickly here, but it would make sense for her to show up in the finale of this and then head into Daryl Dixon season 2. That would just make all kinds of sense. So we're hoping, but also don't be too disappointed, or try not to be, if she doesn't show up. But I am very excited for next week and to hear what you all thought of the episode. So let me know, and have a wonderful week, and I will be back answering your asks over the next few days. Bye!